Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Tonight we're going to be talking about GrandInvolve, a nonprofit that actually puts retired seniors into classrooms in our Fairfax County Public Schools. Joining me in this first segment is Sara crummett. She is a guidance counselor with Crestwood Elementary School. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So Crestwood Elementary School, I think, was one of the first, if not the first, elementary school in this program.
Yes, we were the very first school.
So tell me a little bit about so I assume you're the original guidance counselor with this program?
Yes.
So how did your principal at the time kind of roll this out to you and then explain to us how you sort of rolled this out to the classroom teachers?
Well, it was an interesting process. So through GrandInvolve is headed up by a wonderful individual named Dorothy Keenan. And she had some connections with our principal as well as a few staff members at our school. And she really sold the idea to them. And then the idea was just presented to me and sold to me. And it sounded like a great idea. And we just decided to take the idea and run with it and see what we could do.
So your school is considered a Title I school. Help our viewers to understand what that means when you are in a Title I school.
Being a Title I school is a federal terminology. There's certain criteria that schools have to meet to be able to be considered a Title I school. There's multiple factors that are involved, such as the socioeconomic status of the students that attend the school. How many students, what percentage of students receive free and reduced meals, such as breakfast and lunch. It also looks at the standardized test scores, which in the state of Virginia, the SOL test scores, as well as just other factors. But those are primarily the major factors.
And so some of these kids coming into these schools, and they are on free and reduced lunch, or they get a free breakfast before school starts, a lot of them come from very international families. So English as a second language, I'm assuming, is probably one of the things that your classroom teachers are also dealing with.
That's absolutely correct. At Crestwood Elementary School, which is located in Central Springfield, about 70% of our students receive free or reduced meals, and 80% of our students speak a language other than English at their home.
Which is great. One of the things I love about Northern Virginia is that we are very multicultural. I think that's an asset for kids to be in a classroom and experiencing lots of other traditions and lots of other worldviews other than the one that they have at home. But this does make it challenging for your teachers, which is why this whole program came into being, because there is an untapped resource, and it is retired people.
Yes, unfortunately, in schools that are Title I schools, where parents and families are really struggling, where parents are working 2, sometimes 3 jobs, unfortunately, they just don't have the time that they'd like to be able to volunteer in their child's school. And these are students that they need that extra practice in reading or speaking or even math. And so having volunteers be able to work with them one-on-one not only helps them academically, but it also helps them to build relationships with someone who's older than them, where maybe their extended family live in a different country.
That is true. I mean, some of us were fortunate enough to grow up close to where our grandparents are, and a lot of these students have moved here. They're new to this country, and so their grandparents may not be anywhere around. So the intergenerational connection obviously has a lot of benefit to both your volunteers and to the students.
That's absolutely correct. Many times volunteers will say that they're amazed that the students, want to touch them or have questions about, why is their hair the color it is, or why do they have aging spots, which of course the kids don't know that they're aging spots, they just see spots. So a lot of times kids, have curious questions.
So tell me a little bit about, so from the first year when you had your first volunteers and now it's 3 years later, how has the program grown, and the number of teachers who have actually welcomed volunteers? Is that number also increased as well?
Certainly the number of volunteers that we have has certainly grown, not only through the program itself, strengthening and becoming better, but I think also just the word of mouth of volunteers saying this has been a great experience and telling their friends, and then their friends would like to, figure out what this is all about. Also, the same is true with our teachers, that, teachers talk about they have this volunteer who comes in, who works with their students either in small groups, and then other teachers are thinking, I have students that could also benefit from that small group or one-on-one interaction. So it certainly has grown, both with our numbers of volunteers as well as our number of staff members who have volunteers working with them.
And that's great. I mean, if you've got something of value, clearly people are going to share what's working. From the volunteers' perspective, what is the process as far as them, meeting the requirements of the public school system, background checks, that sort of thing, and then how do you help to coordinate the volunteers and make certain that they're in the classrooms?
So it's kind of a lot of steps. One of the steps, I'll start first with the volunteers, is really just expressing an interest. At Crestwood, and I really feel like any organization that's working with volunteers understands that volunteers are giving of their time. So at Crestwood, we really work to meet the needs and the comfort level of the volunteers. So we ask them what's their availability, what's their preference of a day of the week, of the time, grade level, academic focus. And of course, we say to them, we know that you're giving of your time, and you have your own life. So if you're going on a doctor's visit or you have a vacation, that's totally fine. We can work around that. There's also a survey that's given to all of our staff members to see what their interests are in having a volunteer. So there's some magic that goes there of making matches. But then also for volunteers working in a Fairfax County public school, they are required to undergo a criminal background check, which is handled through the FCPS HR office, which does involve filling out some criminal background check paperwork, as well as being fingerprinted and having a photo ID taken of them. And that's it's completely free. You just have to go to the main FCPS administrative building at Gatehouse, and it only takes, I would like to say, around 45 minutes. It's not a long process.
It's not a long process, and they give you a nifty badge.
Yes.
And you look very official when you clip it on your shirt, because I did that earlier this year, and the only trouble I had was you need to know all the birth dates of all of your ex-husbands. And I didn't really come prepared for that, but I did manage to figure it out. So I would say that is really not much of a hurdle. And as to your point, these volunteers don't have to sign, even if you're signing up for the whole year. If you're spending February in Florida, that is not a problem.
Right. And certainly, once you undergo the criminal background check at one time, if you decide that you'd like to continue on a second year at the same school or a different Fairfax County public school, the person who's in charge of volunteers, they just make the request through HR for a new ID badge. So you don't have to go through the process again. Yeah, once you do it once, it's taken care of.
So how has this affected other kinds of volunteers? So you've got, these retired people who are coming into the classroom. Have you seen the numbers of other kinds of volunteers go up at the school?
It's hard to say because I feel like sometimes we have different populations of students or different families that come through. It's not overwhelming that there has been an increase in parents coming in to volunteer on a consistent basis. Certainly we have volunteers who are parents who volunteer with field trips or other things, grade level specific, but yeah, the GrandInvolve organization is certainly been a blessing to all grades and all students at Crestwood. So
I know that Green Spring has volunteers, and they have managed to work out through a nearby church transportation that takes the volunteers from Green Spring to the school on a certain day and takes them home again. And so that's another option too for people who may not necessarily be in a position to drive themselves. There are places or there's organizations that are working with GrandInvolve to kind of get volunteers to the school and back again.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And through GrandInvolve, there's lots of other ways that you can volunteer where you don't have to volunteer specifically in a classroom if that's not your comfort level of working with students, but you still want to give back.
Right, so we're going to be talking at the end of the show with an action team volunteer, because there's a lot of strategic planning that goes into this. This is a program that started 3 years ago. They're slowly adding schools in every year because it's very methodical, and you're asked to keep certain records too about volunteer hours and the number of teachers who are using volunteers so that we can actually track the effectiveness and the participation level. Mm-hmm. Is that burdensome, or is that something that is pretty easy to manage for you?
It's pretty easy to manage. Pretty much, I believe every Fairfax County public school has some type of computer-based check-in, check-out system, both for students as well as for volunteers. So it's just a matter of running a query through the computer software.
That's great. And so I think one of the other things that I think people think about too when talking about how teachers have embraced this, and we are going to talk to a teacher in the next segment, is whether they have seen this as an asset worth investing their time in, rather than immediately thinking to themselves, this is one more thing to manage. I mean, what are the things you hear from teachers?
It all depends. I think that teachers who don't know how to use a volunteer, they do have some of those fears at first of, this is going to be more work, I don't know what to do with them. But then I think just as much of a learning curve, sometimes it can be for a volunteer, it can be that way for a teacher. And then once a teacher knows how to effectively use a volunteer, it all works out amazing. And then you hear teachers saying, I know that when the volunteer walks in, there's a certain group of kids that they're going to go and they're going to work with that volunteer. And so there's lots of amazing stories that comes out of the relationships that are formed between volunteers and students and also the staff members.
So from a guidance counselor's point of view, you would highly recommend to any other guidance counselor, and because this really does start with the principal deciding that it's a program they want, and then the next immediate person is the guidance counselor has to buy into it.
It depends on the school. Schools have decisions about who they are going to put in charge of being a volunteer coordinator. It just happens to be that at my school I do a lot of things with community outreach as well as with volunteers.
Well, thank you so much, Sara. I really, really appreciate you being here and kind of sharing the experience of Crestwood with our viewers. When we come back from our break, we're going to be talking with a teacher and asking some questions about what that experience has been in the classroom with GrandInvolve volunteers. So please join us after this break as we explore GrandInvolve.
Okay.
Okay, so what would you bring to my company?
What do you need?
I need problem-solving skills.
I got through high school without a car, a phone, or a computer.
No college degree, though.
Not yet, but life's taught me a lot, and I'm ready for more.
Well, you're not the typical kind of candidate that I hire. But you are exactly what I'm looking for.
Your company could be missing out on the candidates it needs most. Learn how to find a great pool of untapped talent at gradsoflife.org.
They'll test you. Try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we are talking with a teacher volunteer from Crestwood School. Welcome so much. Thank you for joining me, Eve Hall.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So you are a teacher at Crestwood School. We just spoke to the guidance counselor, Sara. And so tell us a little bit about what actually happens in the classroom as a teacher coordinating with these volunteers. And I think you said you started out in the 3rd grade originally?
Yes, I did 3rd grade for 5 years at Crestwood. And when I first started having GrandInvolve volunteers, I was a 3rd grade teacher. And I heard you talking with Sara about fears that teachers might have. And I think for me it was, are they going to feel appreciated? Are they going to feel comfortable with the things that I'm asking them to do? I certainly didn't want anyone to feel like I was asking them to do something they didn't want to do. So it's getting to know each other.
I was about to say, so it's a little bit like dating.
A little bit.
A little bit like dating, in that you're trying to figure out what it is they expect and want, and they're trying to figure out what you expect and want, and so you're kind of doing this little dance, and then you've got the kids too. And I'm sure they've got questions about who is this person and why are they here, and so how did you kind of roll out the fact that these people were in the classroom?
Well, our children are wonderful and very excited to see new faces. In the beginning, I made sure to ask a lot of questions of the volunteers about what would you like to do, what makes you most comfortable. And I still, even though my volunteers have been with me for 3 years, will shoot them an email saying, this is what we're doing tomorrow. Would you feel better doing this piece or that piece?
Oh, that's fantastic.
Just so that everybody is as comfortable as they can be. And our children just are happy to see anybody come in the door. They love the volunteers. After a period of weeks or months, it's like Norm on Cheers, Miss Dennis.
Right, because it's that extra adult attention too.
Yes,
and kids crave that. Kids of all ages crave that extra adult attention, which, given the classroom size that a lot of teachers have, that makes it's very difficult, I would imagine, to try to give that much attention, especially if kids need extra help.
Right. And our children, many of them come from poverty, and their parents, like Sara said, are working 2 and 3 jobs. They might not have as much individual attention as I know their parents would like to give them. And they're one of us and many of them, so the more people in the room, the better. The more attention they get, whether it's the volunteer listening to them read or helping them write, doing math with them, or just having lunch with them sometimes.
So
really
you started out in 3rd grade, now you are in Head Start, and your volunteers followed you. That's a big leap to go from 3rd graders to little bitty kids.
A big leap, yes. In 3rd grade they were helping the kids with math and reading and writing. And one of my volunteers even didn't work with the kids, but was helping me to file books or to make copies or make bulletin boards, things like that. But they're all 3 in the classroom with me now, and I told them I wouldn't be offended if they didn't want to make that leap, because it's a big switch.
I would think it'd be a little bit more work.
Well, a lot of people think it's not as much because it's not as academic, but it's very...
energy, lots of energy,
yeah.
I would imagine,
and
would be
they've
needed.
never been to school before, so there's a big learning curve just about,
how to be in a classroom.
Be at school.
Yeah.
So, but my volunteers are wonderful, and they've been just hands-on the whole way, and we know each other well enough now that they know I'm not going to be offended if they don't want to do something in particular, and I try to ask whenever I think it'll be something weird. And I feel comfortable asking because I know that they'll say, yeah, not really. So I don't feel like I'm overstepping if I throw it out there.
And that to me is such a team approach. Like, you've got a team of people, and you work and you coordinate, and there's feedback in both directions.
And they each come once a week it started out for 2 hours, but then, like you said, with the little ones, it gets so hectic. many of them will stay 3 or 4 hours if they don't have somewhere to go, and just stay on through lunch to get them down to nap.
Wow.
And then we all sit down and take a deep breath. And then some days, if I have something special, like we're carving pumpkins or planting green beans or making gingerbread cookies, I might say, we're doing this. I know it's not your regular day, but who's up for this? And some days I'll have all 3 volunteers in the room, because when you have that many little hands inside pumpkins,
that's a lot. I mean, like I said,
lots of adult hands.
Yeah. And it's just amazing to me, first of all, the flexibility, the fact that you are so accommodating and concerned about whether or not the volunteer is getting out of this what they want out of this. And just the fact that you can send an email for a special event and have them show up. That's like having a special forces. It's like having the Navy SEALs.
It really is important. Well, like you said, for the kids to have that individual attention and that model of how adults operate, but also to have that backup. I can do a lot of things that I wouldn't attempt if it were just me or just me and my assistant. So I can say, well, I can do little groups. When we were planting, they were so excited about those little tiny shovels and flinging the dirt around everywhere. I knew that I could be outside with one volunteer doing that with 4 children at a time, while my assistant had another volunteer in the room helping the classroom run, and then they'd send 4 out at a time. Whereas I don't think I would have attempted it with all 17 kids at once.
And that's fantastic too. Speaking with Sara earlier, talking about the fact that volunteers do have things. They have family vacations, or they have a doctor's appointment, and there are times when they're not going to be able to accommodate your schedule or your request, and that's okay.
Right, they just shoot me an email and say, I'm not going to make it this day, and sometimes it's that morning. Usually, if they know ahead of time, they're great about telling me, well, 2 weeks from now I have this or that. And I will just plan something a little bit less labor intensive that day.
Well, that's
if
fantastic.
I know I don't have a hand.
That's fantastic. So what about you? So your 3rd graders, I'm imagining, are still in the same elementary school, but now their volunteers are with the little kids at Head Start. Do you ever, see the interaction when your former students see these volunteers in the hallway, like the shout of recognition, like, it's you?
Yes, all the time. And I'm fortunate that I'm on the main hallway, so I see many of the students I had in 2nd grade and 3rd grade have to come by my room to get to their classroom. So they walk by all the time and check on their little brothers and sisters and cousins. And then I see them when the volunteers come by, oh, Miss Dennis, Miss Norman, Miss Howard, they get so excited because they're buddies. And my volunteers often help with things like International Night and the book fair and knitting club. Miss Dennis does knitting club every Wednesday. And so they interact with the kids on multiple levels, not just in the classroom.
And that is something, and I wouldn't have even thought to consider that a volunteer might bring a skill like knitting to an after-school activity. So that's something else that a volunteer who has a particular interest might find, that the school is open to having an after-school or before-school activity around that.
Or evening events. The book fair and International Night, many volunteers helped with. And like I said, one of my volunteers for the first 2 years didn't want to get in with the kids, but she wanted to be of help, so she did a lot of copying and things like that.
The administrative things, because that has to be done too.
Right.
So anything
and
someone's
that takes
doing,
a lot of our time.
Right, anything that somebody's doing for you so you don't have to do it means you've got more time to focus on the kids.
Right.
So you've had these same volunteers with you. Have you seen your fellow teachers kind of slowly adopting or being open to the idea that maybe they could do this in their classroom?
Oh, definitely. And many of them do. And a lot of them have the same concerns I had before I started. That means, if they're coming Tuesday, Monday night, I have to think, what are they going to do? And so I try to tell them how I got started. We have the daily 5 in the lower grades, which really became easy for me because I didn't have to say, well, play this math game or do this lesson with them. I could make them a part of the daily 5, which is the students can choose 3 choices a day. I want to read to myself or read to a partner or work on writing. or do word work or get on the computer. And so I would just, after I got to know them well enough and they were comfortable with it, make my volunteers a choice for Daily 5. You could choose to do writing with Miss Howard or to read to Miss Stennis. And that made it easy for me. I didn't have to prepare something ahead of time, something else to prepare for them to do. And the students could choose, and after a while I got, they were arguing over it. I had to make a list of who went last,
right?
Who got first choice that day.
So you really kind of fell into a rhythm of how things worked in the classroom, which I'm assuming probably made it easier for everyone, the children, and for the volunteers, and for yourself, right. That there was this certain rhythm about the day or the week as it went along.
Yes, definitely. It was much easier for me not to have to prepare ahead. And like I said, I was always checking to make sure, do you feel comfortable? How many students do you feel comfortable with at a time? Because I didn't ever want them to feel overwhelmed or like they couldn't say, that's not my strong suit.
And as far as things like getting in the floor or sitting in those tiny chairs, you have a way of like making sure that everybody is safe in the classroom.
Yes.
I personally couldn't get on a floor and get back up again, just couldn't do it.
Well, and when I taught preschool 15 years ago, I could do that a lot better than I can now. But I make accommodations for myself every day, and we have lots of adult chairs in the room, and they just make it work with whatever they can do. If they can't sit on the floor with the kids, they can pull up an adult chair and sit near them. And still have the interaction. Or the kids sit at a table and they can pull up an adult chair to the table when they're in the kid chairs.
And these are some of the things that I think when people are considering, can I do this, they're asking very practical questions. Potential volunteers asking very practical questions about what would it look like and what would the demands be time-wise or physically in order to be a volunteer. But in your experience, and it's been 3 years because Crestwood is the first school to be in the GrandInvolve program, that this has worked out really well.
Right, and I think like you said, it's such a personal relationship between the volunteer and the teacher. And Sara does a wonderful job matching people. And I think the volunteers always know that if it wasn't the best match, and the teachers know, maybe we can get a different match. And I think most of the times it does work out because she really asks a lot of questions before she matches people. And then you can choose to stay, or maybe you just want to try a different grade level.
Right.
And that's always fine too.
There's big
or
leaps.
Doing office work.
Right, there's big leaps between even Head Start and third grade, but a fourth grader or fifth grader, it's a whole different ballgame when you talk about different ages and the level of maturity of those different students.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being on this segment. I really appreciate talking with you. I love the teacher's perspective of this.
Well, thank you for having me.
So after the break, come back. We're going to be talking to an actual classroom volunteer. Suba is going to tell us from the volunteer's perspective how it is for him being a GrandInvolve volunteer.
There's more than just books at the library.
There's more than just books at the library.
Excuse me. There's more than just books at the library.
Il y a plus que de livres à la bibliothèque.
A lot of great books here today. There's more than just books at the library.
I know.
There's more than just books at the library.
I don't want to be hooked to a machine.
I want all the medical treatment available to me.
I wouldn't want my family to have to make this decision.
My doctor knows what's best for me.
An advance directive is your life on your terms. Talk with your family. Decide what's right for you. Then put it in writing.
Documenting my wishes today means my family won't have to make heart-wrenching decisions later.
To learn more, visit www.putitinwriting.org.
1,200 American youth run away from their homes every day. The National Runaway Switchboard is here to help. 1-800-RUNAWAY. If you are a runaway, Thinking about running away from home, or a parent or guardian concerned about issues facing your child, call us 24 hours a day. 1-800-RUNAWAY. In times of crisis, hope is just a phone call away. 1-800.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Tonight we're talking about GrandInvolve, a nonprofit program that puts retired seniors into classrooms here in Fairfax County. Joining me in this segment is Suba Satay, who is a volunteer. Thank you so much for being here, Suba.
Well, thank you for having me.
So we spoke with the guidance counselor, we spoke with the teacher, and you are a volunteer at Crestwood Elementary School.
Yes, I am.
So you are retired Air Force, you're a civilian DOD. I don't know what people think is the profile of a typical volunteer, but I would not have pegged volunteers as having that profile. So tell us how you got involved in GrandInvolve and what the appeal was to you.
Well, when I retired, I always wanted to volunteer, and I wanted to give back to the community in some way. And it so happened that I was volunteering with ARP and a couple of other organizations, and they were having a volunteer event at Lorton. And so I was walking around, and I met Sara, because she was behind the table, says Crestwood needs volunteers. And I was really surprised because I thought you couldn't volunteer at a school, you had to be a parent, or you could only substitute teach. So I said, Sara, is this for real? And she said, yes, we can really use volunteers. And so, you know, I signed up with them. I went through the vetting process, which was very easy. And this is just completed my second year.
That's fantastic. So tell us about the teacher that you were placed with. So Sara, matched you up with a teacher.
Yeah, she gave me some choices, and she said that these are your choices, and what would you like to do first? I said, well, I would like to help students with their reading and writing. I knew Crestwood had a diversified school. Me originally being from India, of course I knew English quite well when I came to this country, but I knew they were from a multicultural background, with Sara telling me the percentages, and I said, wow, that's where I want to volunteer. So I could help these kids with their reading and writing. And so I said, I want to do reading and writing. Of course, she asked me about math and science and all that, and I said, no, I want to do reading and writing. So basically did first and second grades and completed my second year.
Wow, first and second grades, because that really is the very beginning.
Yes.
When they're learning to read and learning to write.
Yes.
So they're little sponges.
Yes.
You know, kids are really, they learn so much, but when English is not the language that's spoken at home, that is a special hurdle.
Yes, it is. And what I tell them is my own personal story. I do tell them I'm originally from India, and tell them that English is a must for them to get ahead. I put that in their heads, and the teachers do appreciate that. And when I first got to meet the teachers, of course they had to know me, and I had to know them. So it was a learning process to see what I could do with the kids, and some of it was working one-on-one, then it was with groups. But each time I worked with a child, I asked the teacher, can I bring my lifetime experiences and let them know, not trying to make a big deal out of it because they are young, but just letting them know, hey, you've got to study, you've got to learn English in order to get a good education and get a good job.
Well, you're modeling something for them. You know, a lot of them look at you and they probably see, well, here's a man who looks more like me than maybe my teacher does, and he's telling me something important about what he did, you know, to be a grown-up, a successful grown-up.
Yeah, well, last year they had career day, and I dressed, well, not dressed up, I came in as an Air Force officer.
Wow.
And it was funny because when I was talking to the different kids, they thought I was a policeman. And I said, no, I belong to the service, and right away everybody thought, oh, Army. I said, no, Air Force. And so I had some fun with the kids because some of their uncles or whoever were in the service. So I had a little fun with them. I brought some Air Force memorabilia from home to show them, sort of like so they can touch it and feel it and say, hey, listen, maybe one day after you go to school and graduate, you can also be an officer, because I never thought in the world of me when I came to this country that I'd be serving this country as an Air Force officer.
So, you know, to me that offers them options that otherwise they may not ever have seen or known about. And I would say that that's probably true of all the volunteers who bring their life experience and what they did in their career before they were a volunteer,
Yes.
to explain to the children that there's lots of things that they may never have considered.
Oh my gosh, so much more options than when I went to school. What's available to them now. And that's what I always try to impress on them. But you've got to study, work hard, don't try to get on that cell phone too much.
Right,
Of course,
they love playing. My little mentee was like, do you have your cell phone? I got to the point where I would not take my cell phone into the building.
Yes, and that's true with my nieces and nephews and kids that I'm around. Of course, if I need help with my cell phone, they'll help me.
They will, but they also just want to look up everything and play with it and whatever.
So I try to tell them, hey, use your brain. And I tell them when I'm working one-on-one with them, the interesting thing is, they'll say, Mr. Suba, now what's the answer? I said, no, I'm not telling you. Use what's here. And they go, I first ask them, what's up here? They go, my brain. And I go, yes, that's what you've got to use. And it's amazing when they come up with the answer and they look at me with this just amazing little faces. And I go, see, you knew this all along, but you didn't think you did. And the best part of my day is when I come to those classes and they all look up at me with those little faces and say, hello, Mr. Suba. And it just makes my day, even if I'm having a bad day.
Well, you know, I can imagine that it would, but the fact that you can take the extra time, a teacher can't necessarily or doesn't always have the time to sit and let them figure the answer out, right? Yes. I mean, there's schedules and there's 28 kids, and a lot of times you have to move on to the next thing. And I think that is hard for kids who struggle not to have somebody who's willing to sit with them and help them work through it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I've got to give a sincere appreciation to the teachers. I finally get a close-up view of what they do day in and day out. And I sent the email to the teachers saying, wow, what you do each day for these kids is just amazing. We always finish off the class in the first and second grade. I read to the kids. So they're all sitting down and I'm reading to them. And they always want to ask questions. Of course, there's a time limit, so I have to move on. So I've learned now how to manage time better. But amazing, sincere appreciation to those teachers of what they do day in, day out.
You know, in first and second grade, and probably third grade too, those teachers are the ones that a lot of students tend to remember throughout their entire lives are the first teacher that helped them to learn or master a skill. Or, you know, it was, for me, my favorite teacher is my third grade teacher. I will always remember her as my favorite teacher ever because it made such an impact.
Yes.
So I know you have to feel the value of the fact that, you know, one of my favorite axioms is that we should all plant a few trees that we'll never sit under.
Right, that's a good one.
And that's what volunteering is. You're planting these little trees, and you may not know what happens to them 10 or 15 years from now, but you know you planted a pretty strong tree.
Well, I hope so. I hope I can make this much of a difference in the life of those kids. Because I see them and I see, wow, and I told them all that they are our future. For Volunteer Appreciation Week, each class made up a little book for me. And I went home and read each one of them. And it meant more to me than all the medals I got in the United States Air Force. It was just amazing. And when my wife came home, I showed it to her. And so I just still keep it. In fact, I'm going to be seeing my friend who's a 3-star general this Thursday, and I'm taking that to him so he can see it, because it was amazing what the kids did just to thank me, and they didn't have to do that.
Well, you know, again, it's the power of the relationship. You get something, they get something. And so is it sad when they get promoted to the next grade? Like they're not going to see you next year because they're going to be a third grader?
It really, really is. That's a great question, because I see them in the halls and they go, hey, Mr. Suba, when are you going to come to my class? And of course I go, well, I'm in the first and second grade. But the good part is I did get to see some of the first graders in the second grade class. So I did have a little bit more relationship with them, and I think hopefully those kids told the other kids that I was okay. But next year, I've already sent an email to Sara that I have another day to volunteer, so I want to volunteer with third and fourth graders.
Oh, see, now I see what's happening here. You're not fooling me one little bit. You are following your kids by doing this.
I think so.
Very transparent here, Mr. Suba. I know what you're all about.
You found me out.
I did find you out. Extra day, I'll just follow those kids right on into the 4th and 5th grade.
Yep.
So what would you say to other volunteers who have questions about, you know, the time commitment or, you know, the flexibility, or, you know, I can imagine that some people are reluctant or don't feel like they have the skills necessary to work in a classroom with children. So what would you counsel someone?
Well, what I would tell a volunteer is try it out, okay, because it's not like a job. And they'll let you do different things. If you don't want to work with kids, there's plenty of opportunities to volunteer for administration, to make copies and things like that. I know I wanted to work with kids. Long time ago, I wanted to be a teacher. I just couldn't get there. Now this is my best option to be that teacher and try to be a role model for these kids. So I would tell the volunteers they have a lot of experience to bring in. And they can really test the waters, as I say, work with the different kids. They have all the 1st through 6th grade there at Crestwood. And that's what I did. I said, hey, match me up with teachers. And again, if it doesn't work out, you can certainly say, you know what, maybe 1st grade wasn't for me. Maybe I need older kids. Maybe I need to do 6th grade. So that is something Sara gives the option. And the great thing is, once Sara matches up with the teachers, my daily or weekly dialogue is with the teachers.
Right.
So if I can't come in for a particular week, I just tell the teacher tells me, hey, I've got a substitute coming in, but if you're more than welcome to come in this week to still help out. And the substitutes actually love it.
I was about to say, what a boon for a substitute teacher for you to be that continuity when the teacher is not there.
Yes, it really is. I found that out with the substitute because there was one quite young substitute and she goes, do you want to read to them? I said, oh, I'd love to read to them. She said, oh my gosh, they would love that. So we spent like almost the whole 1 hour, because I spend 1 hour in my 1st grade class, then go to my 2nd grade class, and they're just coming in from PE. So you can see the energy they already have. So before they enter the class, I give them high fives, and they want me to hand the hand up there so they can jump.
Right.
But it's great to see their boundless energy, to see them, and but that's what I would tell volunteers. Hey, don't be afraid, just volunteer, because they have so many different roles for you to play at the school.
I think it's amazing because I get the sense that you got that encore career that you always wanted of being a teacher, and this was a great vehicle for you to actually be the teacher you wanted to be.
Yes, I think so. This is like my second profession, but here I don't have to do it full time. I can volunteer and help out my small way and let the teachers kind of do their thing, but also help them out. Because sometimes the teachers do need a break, and when I'm reading the story to them, they are sitting and kind of
getting recentered.
They are recentered and resetting because it takes so much energy on their part to teach what they need to do with the kids each day.
Now I can imagine that it would. And I really so appreciate you sharing your experience with us, Mr. Suba. And it's going to be good news for those kids come the fall, those 3rd and 4th graders who are like, Mr. Suba's in my class, right?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
Well, you are very welcome. So when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking with Cindy. She is an action team volunteer with GrandInvolve, and we'll look a little bit more at the future plans of this fantastic organization.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about $3,000. Nothing very nice. Homeless minds. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals and the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent. Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. Tonight we are talking about GrandInvolve, a program that puts retired seniors into classrooms in schools in Fairfax County. Joining me in this last segment is Cindy Nothom. She is an action team volunteer currently at Parklawn. However, she did start out as one of the original members of GrandInvolve 3 years ago. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
So Dorothy Keenan, the founder of GrandInvolve, had a vision, and she has slowly put together a team that includes both the classroom volunteers, and we've talked to a teacher and a volunteer and a counselor, but there are strategic volunteers, and you are one of those people. Explain a little bit about what an action team volunteer does.
Well, the action team volunteer is one that coordinates between the GrandInvolve program and the school and tries to find out what the school's goals are and what they would like to have volunteers do at their school. So, and then to try to find the volunteers to do it. So that, and also part of the leadership is to be at meetings to work with the future planning to see where we're going with schools or how we're going to change things, talk to the other action team members in different schools, what their schools are doing, is there something else we can do with our volunteers? So it's kind of a coordinator.
A coordinator position. So we've heard a lot about Crestwood. Everybody knows everything there is to know about Crestwood almost. But Parklawn, where is Parklawn located?
Parklawn's in the Lincolnia area on Braddock Road, and it's a really nice little school that the principal, the assistant principal, the parent liaison that I worked with all were fabulously encouraged to have GrandInvolve come in and be part of their school. And they worked really hard to help their teachers to understand what GrandInvolve could do and be accepting to have volunteers in. And the first year I was there as a volunteer towards the end of the year, and it was kind of interesting to just go to the different classrooms, because I hadn't been in a school since my children were little for a long time.
I
and it was
experienced that this year too. My youngest is 27, right? It's been a long time.
Yeah, well, mine are in their 40s, and so it had been a long time since I'd been in elementary school. And it was interesting to see all these little children moving around and how quiet they were and how curious they were. Then the second year I was there, not only did I work as a coordinator with the parent liaison that functions much like Sara does at Crestwood, I worked with her, but I also volunteered in one of the classrooms. So I got to meet more of the teachers and to see more of what goes on in classrooms. And then they wanted to know would I be interested in learning how to laminate, because they didn't have a volunteer to do that, and that would be really helpful. And it's like, so I learned how to laminate.
See, and that's a skill you can put on your resume. I know how to laminate.
That's it.
So when you're looking for volunteers, it's a big county, and basically Title I schools are being identified long-term, by certain regions, as far as choosing where GrandInvolve will try to launch a program next. Mm-hmm. So volunteers may not always be even in the immediate community where the school is, right? So you don't have to be anywhere near Lincolnia in order to volunteer. You can take volunteers from any place. All they have to do is have a willingness to travel there to be a volunteer.
That's right. And we use whatever opportunities are available when there's programs that are looking at older adults in Fairfax County, whether it be Ventures and Volunteers or Volunteer Fairfax, or I met with Colmore Partners, the civic organizations, excuse me, to let them know that we have a need for volunteers, and Parklawn was the school that was in that area, but we also have schools in Mount Vernon Woods and in Lorton Station, in Herndon and Chantilly, and we'll be growing to other schools. So, you know, if they're willing to travel, we have schools for them.
You know, and I think that is such, you know, a wonderful thing. Again, talking with Mr. Suba about his encore career, that's what I really see this. I mean, we call it volunteering, but for people who have a real interest in education, this is an opportunity to really get in there and do something meaningful and valuable to both the student and the teacher. I mean, do you get a sense that the volunteers, that's one of the drivers for people who volunteer?
The majority of the volunteers that we had at Parklawn were older adults. They were in their 80s, and they had been teachers, they'd been librarians, they'd been professional people.
Wow.
But they have a sense about themselves that they wanted to give to the community. They still had the ability to give to the community, and they were interested in the future of the community, and getting to know the children, getting to know where their children are from, and being somebody that the children could talk to. And they told me at the end of this year, this has been the most fun that we've had. We go home and we smile all the way home because some little child has asked them some question that they had no idea about, or they had just been greeted with such warmness with the children of seeing them. So that seemed to be helping them to have a sense of purpose and contributing. And the children, you would see them going down the hall and the volunteer, whether they had their walker or they had a cane, the children are waving and giving them little sneaky waves or big waves and trying not to get in trouble for being too noisy. But they were excited to see the volunteers.
You know, and you bring up something interesting about mobility. Somebody with a walker, somebody with a cane. And this is part of not everybody's aging process, but it is for a lot of people. And in some sense, you're kind of normalizing that for children, in that there are people in my school, and they're here to help, and they work with my teacher, and they're older. And they might walk with a cane, but they are just like my teacher. I mean, to me, that kind of gives this very positive perception of age.
Yeah, I think it's really beneficial for the children to have the opportunity to be around somebody that uses a mobility device, because they can ask the questions. They don't have to wonder what it is or what's going on, and you know, they still get that warm smile. They get the hello from the volunteer, and so yeah, it makes it normal for them.
I think that's fantastic, and I think the extra attention to, as you said, the volunteers get an awful lot out of it, but so do the kids, because there is somebody who shows up and is willing to give them their full time and attention. And we've talked about the fact that some of these kids come from homes where their parents really are working a lot and don't necessarily have time to help them. So this kind of adult presence in a school has so many positive things for both the teacher and the children. So going forward, the next group of volunteers, I guess, will start in October. If you can kind of walk us through someone who's watching today saying, I want to be a volunteer, what would that process look like for them today?
Well, if they're interested in being volunteers, if they want to look at the website, which is GrandInvolve.org, or they want to send an email to GrandInvolve@gmail.com, we can be in touch with them to kind of find out what they're interested in and what school they would be interested in, because maybe they would want to be able to block off time in October to start, or they may say, that's really not what I'm interested in, and they'll find some other meaningful volunteer option.
Right. So I think one of the things that Dorothy has been talking about is, during an orientation, that would be a time in which we could do the background check and the fingerprinting, because actually the school system will do that. I think if you have a certain number of volunteers, you don't have to go to Gatehouse Road, that Gatehouse Road will come to you. And so that's the other thing about expressing an interest in July or August, is the fact that we will be setting up these opportunities for orientations and to kind of go through the process for people who think they want to be volunteers.
Yeah, we started having some interviews from the school with the volunteers in the middle of September, so that the school could start to match the volunteers with the teachers that were interested in having volunteers. And so that by the 1st of October, the volunteers could go into the classroom and be with their teacher, and away we went for the rest of the year.
I think, you know, and that the whole matching process is, like I said, it's kind of like the dating game, is matching up the volunteer with the teacher in a way that works. At Parklawn, do you hope to add more volunteers this year? Is this something where you hope to add volunteers every year?
Of course, because what I would have had the ability to put volunteers in 3 or 4 other classrooms. We had teachers that after they saw what the volunteers were doing, or they talked to their other teachers, you know, that it wasn't a lot of extra work to have a volunteer, an old volunteer, that I had requests, but I didn't get any more volunteers. So I had been out, like I said, I'd been out to as many areas as I could, trying to find other people that would be interested in coming to volunteer. So we'd love to have more.
That's interesting that you've actually got more demand than you have volunteers.
I know.
I'm really kind of surprised by that, but that's fantastic. So reaching out to organizations, I'm assuming places like faith communities and community centers or senior centers are all the obvious places that you look for people who have the time to be volunteers. I'm going to rack my brain to try to think of some other venues where we can find people who are retired and who have an interest, because it seems to me as long as you've got teachers who are like, I want volunteers, we need to find these folks. So you mentioned some of the organizations that you already work with as far as, you know, seniors, and help me remember them. Ventures in Volunteering, Volunteer Fairfax. What are some of the other ones where people may not know organizations that are affiliated with GrandInvolve?
Well, we have connection with the Rotary and you know, any type of organization that we hear that they have meetings, we try to find if we can get a invitation so we can talk about the program. I was at a Starbucks in the Barcroft area meeting with a parent that was interested in volunteering. And the next thing I know, I'm now knowing some people from a church that's not far away that connected me with a civic group that was not far away. So I'm hoping that some of those folks are going to come in for the fall to volunteer at school.
That is a great way to network. And I am a Rotarian, and actually Dot came out to our Rotary Club to do a presentation about GrandInvolve, and I think service organizations like Kiwanis, JC, Rotary, garden clubs, women clubs, there are either Dot or someone else is available to come and speak about the program.
That's right. We have about 15 people on our leadership group that would be more than happy to talk about volunteering and share stories of what it's like to be a volunteer.
Oh, I think that's great. Yep. And transportation too, I think we mentioned that a little earlier, that Green Spring does have a church that provides transportation, so that's another option that we can talk about if you've got a group of people all originating from one place.